Be happier by worrying less, because most people are destroying their own peace every day without realizing it. Buddha spent his entire life observing exactly this mechanism within the human mind and revealed something direct. Excessive worry does not arise from the world. It arises from the way the mind clings to thoughts, and there are very clear teachings that can break this cycle. Today, you will discover 8 Buddhist teachings, music, capable of profoundly changing your relationship with worry. And if you keep watching, you may discover a real way to live with much more lightness every day. Teaching 1. Worry is born in the mind, not in reality. Buddha taught something very simple, yet extremely profound. A large part of human suffering is born in the mind. In the Dhammapada, music, an ancient Buddhist text that preserves teachings attributed to the Buddha, the central idea appears that the mind precedes all things. This means that the way you think shapes the way you live. When the mind begins to imagine problems, repeat negative scenarios, or anticipate difficulties, music, that do not yet exist, it creates a weight that feels real. The body reacts, the heart races, tension appears, but often what is happening outside of you is completely neutral. The problem is not in the present moment. The problem is in the story the mind is telling. Worry works exactly like this. It takes something small and turns it into something huge. A detail becomes a threat, a doubt becomes a giant problem, and without realizing it, you begin to live inside these mental stories. Buddha observed this deeply during his spiritual journey. He realized that the human mind creates suffering by interpreting reality through fear, expectation, and imagination. It is not the event itself that causes suffering. It is the repeated thought about the event. When you begin to observe this within yourself, something curious happens. You realize that many of the problems occupying your mind are simply not happening right now. They are projections, hypotheses, stories the mind creates in an attempt to control the future. And the more the mind tries to control the future, the more it creates worry. It is like trying to hold water in your hands. The more force you use, the more the water slips away. Buddha taught that the first step to freeing yourself from this cycle is to clearly see what is happening in the mind. Just observe without fighting the thoughts. Music, without trying to force the mind to stop. Simply notice. This is a thought. This simple awareness creates a small space between you and the thought. And in that space, something changes profoundly. Because when you realize that a thought, music, is just a thought, it loses part of the power it had over you. It stops seeming like an absolute truth. It stops automatically controlling your emotions. It becomes just an event passing through the mind, like a cloud passing through the sky. And in that moment, a small freedom appears. The freedom, music, not to believe everything your mind says. Teaching 2. Attachment to outcomes creates worry. One of the central teachings, music, of the Buddha is about attachment, called in Pali tanha, which means thirst or an intense desire to control or possess something. When the mind clings to a specific outcome, it begins to live in constant tension because the future is never completely under our control. And when you try to control something that has not yet happened, the mind begins to create worry. Have you noticed how the mind does this all the time? It says, what if it doesn't work? Or, what if something goes wrong? This kind of thinking creates a constant state of alert. The mind begins to monitor the future as if it were waiting for danger to appear at any moment. And this drains mental energy every day. Buddha taught that attachment creates suffering because it tries to grasp something that is naturally uncertain. Life is always changing. Circumstances change, people change, situations change. When you demand that something happen in a very specific way, you create resistance against the very nature of reality. And that resistance appears in the form of worry. The mind begins to calculate possibilities, imagine scenarios, and try to predict everything. But the more it tries to predict, the more it realizes it cannot control everything. This creates anxiety. Buddha did not teach that we should stop acting or stop planning. He taught something much more subtle. He taught us to act without becoming imprisoned by the result, to do what needs to be done now with clarity and presence, but without turning the future into a mental obsession. When you do this, something changes deeply. You still act, you still make an effort, but your mind is not trapped in the tension of what if. You begin to realize that life can be lived with more lightness when you release excessive control over what has not yet happened. And in that space, worry begins to lose its strength. Teaching 3, everything changes, and resisting this creates suffering. One of the most fundamental teachings of Buddhism is called anicca, a Pali word meaning impermanence. Buddha observed something simple and inevitable, music, about existence. Everything changes. Nothing remains exactly the same. Thoughts change, emotions change, situations change. Even the body itself is in constant transformation. But the human mind tends to resist this reality. It wants total stability. It wants to guarantee that things remain safe and predictable. And when the mind realizes it cannot guarantee this, it creates worry. This worry is born from the desire that things, music, remain as they are or happen exactly as we planned. But life does not work that way. Change is not a flaw in reality. Change, music, is the very nature of reality. Buddha taught that much of human suffering comes from trying to fight this simple truth. When something changes, the mind enters into conflict. It asks, why did this happen? Or, how can I prevent this from changing? This internal struggle creates constant mental tension. When you deeply accept impermanence, something very powerful happens. You begin to realize that many worries are attempts to control something that is already in motion. Life is not standing still, waiting for your approval. It is flowing. This does not mean giving up on life. It means stopping the fight against what is inevitable. When you accept that everything changes, the mind begins to relax a little. It realizes it does not need to control every detail. And in that relaxation, a new way of living emerges. A lighter life, more open, less bound to the need to predict and control everything. Teaching 4, attention to the present moment breaks worry. Buddha taught a central practice called sati, music, which means mindfulness. This practice consists of bringing the mind back to the present moment, because worry almost always lives in the future. The mind starts imagining what might happen tomorrow, next week, or months from now. And when it does this, it creates an imaginary reality that feels very real emotionally. The body reacts as if it were already happening. But when you bring your attention back to the present, something curious happens. Often you realize that in this exact moment, nothing bad is happening. You are breathing. The body is here. The moment is happening now. Buddha taught that the present is the only place where life truly happens. The past has already gone. The future has not yet arrived. But the mind insists on living in those two places. The practice of mindfulness is a constant return to the now. Feeling the breath, feeling the body, noticing the environment. It seems simple, but it has a profound effect on the mind, because when the mind returns to the present, it leaves the territory of imagination. It stops feeding stories about the future, and when these stories stop being fed, worry begins to weaken. This is one of the reasons why Buddhist meditation is so powerful. It trains the mind to return to the present again and again, and each time you do this, you break the cycle of worry a little more, and gradually, the mind learns that peace is not in the future. It is available now. Teaching 5. Not every thought deserves your attention. Buddha taught something extremely important about the mind. Thoughts arise and disappear all the time. They appear as mental events. But the problem begins when you believe you need to follow every thought that arises. Imagine your mind as a sky. Thoughts are clouds passing by. Some clouds are light, others look like storms, but none of them are the sky itself. When you completely identify with each thought, you begin to live inside those clouds. And when those clouds are worries, your mind enters a state of constant tension, music. Buddha taught that spiritual practice involves learning to observe thoughts without getting lost in them. This does not mean blocking thoughts. It means not giving automatic attention to all of them. Many thoughts are just mental habits. They appear because the mind is used to thinking that way, but that does not mean they are true or useful. When you realize this, something changes. You begin to see thoughts as passing phenomena. They arise, remain for a moment, and then disappear. This view completely changes your relationship with worry because you realize that not every thought needs to be taken seriously. And in that music space of observation, the mind begins to become much calmer. Teaching 6. Compassion reduces mental burden. Buddha taught the practice of metta, which means loving kindness or compassion. This practice consists of cultivating a genuine feeling of goodwill toward yourself and others. Many worries arise because the mind lives in a state of constant self-criticism. It demands too much, it expects perfection, it repeats past mistakes. This internal pressure creates a sense of psychological weight. The mind becomes rigid and tense. Music, Buddha taught that cultivating compassion softens this mental state. When you treat yourself with more kindness, the mind begins to relax. This does not, music, mean ignoring mistakes or stopping growth. It means recognizing that the human experience involves imperfection. When you develop compassion for yourself and others, something changes in the way you face life. The mind stops being a constant courtroom, and when this internal pressure decreases, worry also begins to decrease. Teaching 7. Simplicity brings peace. Buddha often taught about the importance of a simple life, not necessarily simple in possessions, but simple in the way the mind relates to the world. When the mind fills itself with desires, expectations, and comparisons, it creates a restless mental environment. Music. Worry grows in this kind of environment because the more things the mind tries to control, the more it feels it can lose. Music's simplicity reduces this weight. When you learn to value enough instead of excess, the mind finds more stability. Buddha showed through his own life that inner peace does not depend on accumulating more things, but on reducing the constant need for more. When the mind becomes simpler, worry naturally decreases, because there is less to protect, control, or anticipate. Teaching 8. Wisdom is seeing things as they are. In Buddhism, the word pana means wisdom. It is not just intellectual knowledge, it is the ability to see reality clearly. When the mind clearly sees how thoughts work, how attachment music creates suffering, and how everything constantly changes, something profound happens. Worry begins to seem less convincing. It may still arise, but it no longer dominates the mind in the same way. Buddha taught that this clarity arises gradually through observing one's own experience. The more you observe your mind with honesty, the more you notice the patterns that create worry. Music. And when these patterns become visible, something begins to change within you. Because if worry is born in the mind, what happens when you finally begin to see the mind with real clarity? If worry is born in the mind, then understanding the mind becomes one of the most important things in life. Buddha taught that the mind is not a solid, fixed block, it is a flow. Thoughts arise, remain for a moment, and then disappear. Emotions arise, transform, and also disappear. But when we do not perceive this movement, we begin to believe that what we feel or think, music, now will last forever. Worry feeds exactly on this illusion. The mind, music, creates a scenario and acts as if that scenario were permanent, as if it were an inevitable sentence. But when you observe carefully, you notice something surprising. No thought lasts forever. No emotion lasts forever. This observation profoundly changes the way you live, because when worry appears, you begin to see that it too is a passing phenomenon. It arises as a thought. It grows when you feed that thought, and it diminishes when you stop feeding the mental story, music, that sustains it. This does not mean you will never feel worry again. It means you learn not to be dominated by it. Buddha never promised to completely eliminate human emotions. What he taught was a path to not becoming a prisoner of them. And that difference changes everything. Buddha explained this functioning of the mind very directly when teaching what we now call mindful awareness of mental states, observing what arises within you without reacting automatically. When a worried thought appears, you simply acknowledge it. This is worry. You do not need to fight it. You do not need to run from it. Just recognizing it already creates space, and in that space, the mind begins to regain balance. This kind of observation is not theory, it is direct practice. When you begin to practice this, you notice something almost shocking. Much of worry loses its strength simply because you stopped reacting automatically. The mind was used to chasing every thought. Now it finds someone observing. This presence changes the game. The thought still appears, but it no longer finds the same music, impulse to grow. It passes like a wave that finds no resistance. Buddha also taught something very important about mental repetition. Music, the mind has habits. If for years you have trained your mind to imagine negative scenarios, it will continue doing so automatically, not because reality demands it, but because it has become a pattern. Like any habit, it strengthens with repetition, and that means it can also weaken when the repetition changes. This brings real hope. The mind is not condemned to live in constant worry. It can be trained, not through force or repression, but through awareness. Each time you notice a thought and do not feed it, you weaken that mental pattern a little. It is a gradual process, but extremely powerful. Small internal changes begin to appear. Over time, you start to notice moments of mental silence that did not exist before, small intervals in which the mind simply rests, and in those moments, something very simple appears, a kind of peace music that does not depend on solving all of life's problems, a peace that arises when the mind stops fighting thoughts all the time. Now, think carefully about what you have just realized. Much of the weight you carry every day does not come from reality. It comes from the way the mind clings to thoughts. Music Buddha taught that when you begin to observe the mind clearly, something profound happens. Worry loses the control it had over you. Life does not need to be lived in a constant state of alert. If this teaching resonated with you, music, leave a like on this video. This helps the teaching reach more people who are also trapped in this cycle of worry. And if you want to learn more about Buddha's teachings applied to real life, subscribe to the channel and activate notifications. Here we explore ancient wisdom in a clear, simple, and transformative way. Now tell me in the comments, which of these teachings touched you the most today?